now is time for our fourth session, The Power of Pellets in the Emerging Bioeconomy, with moderator Diane Nichols, Chief Forester of British Columbia, and panelists Jonathan Levesque with Biomass Solution Biomass, Dr. Jack Sadler at the University of British Columbia, and Steve Drayton at Drax. Diane Nichols is going to lead us through a moderated discussion with these leaders in our sector. We'll hear their vision and current research and development that's supporting global efforts against climate change, at the same time confirming wood pellets' rightful place as the gateway to innovation in the emerging bioeconomy, as Minister Conroy challenged us to take up in her comments earlier this morning. So Diane, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm the moderator for this session of the WPAC conference, an annual general meeting. And as Gordon said, it's the power of pellets in the emerging bioeconomy. My name is Diane Nichols. I'm the Chief Forester and Assistant Deputy Minister in the province of British Columbia, and I've been in that role since 2016. The responsibility of the Chief Forester is for forest stewardship at the highest levels. It's a statutory decision in the sense that setting the allowable annual cut that is not influenced or implemented by politicians. It's definitely a determination based on multiple values, and it reflects the sustainability of that land base. One key objective is to maximize the value of every tree we harvest from public land in this province. It's really a foundational and fundamental premise of sustainability. We don't want to waste, and we want to be able to use every last bit that we are harvesting. Our ministry is focused on doing what we can to reduce waste and turn as much harvested forest fiber as possible into usable, valuable products. You will have seen, or you can see on the provincial website, the intentions paper that our province has just released on forest management. Where does wood pellets come into this? Wood pellets comes into focusing on how to reduce our waste and utilize it into new products and start the circular economy that we need to start in British Columbia with respect to the forest sector. Pelletizing residual fibers turns what was once burned at the roadside or in beehive burners at sawmill sites into green renewable energy. This fuel source is displacing fossil fuels in domestic and commercial heating, as you just heard, and energy applications, and making a positive contribution to the fight against climate change. In my role as a Chief Forester, I've had the opportunity to see other jurisdictions and see different approaches to forest management and a forest-based bioeconomy in other regions where forestry factors prominently in the domestic economy. BC is moving in the right direction. We are pursuing added value in our wood products and aiming to maximize every ounce of fiber harvested in our forests. The benefits reach beyond value maximization, and they reach into our domestic and global climate change goals. Wood-based biomass is a carbon neutral friendly source and is displacing fossil fuels, contributing to the transition to a low carbon economy. Wood pellets are the entry point into what is a rapidly developing world of biofuels, biomaterials, bioplastics, and other opportunities. It is that foundation and future potential that makes me so excited to be here today. I'd like to introduce our panel members now that are setting the foundation in Canada and internationally for the future of wood pellets. We will hear first from Jonathan Levesque at Biomass Solutions, which is leading the charge in new technologies and uptake of bioheat and bioenergy solutions in Eastern Canada, transforming the way Canadians think about heat and energy. Secondly, we will hear from Dr. Jack Sadler at UBC, who believes the sky is the limit when it comes to the power of pellets and the role of wood biomass in the biofuel economy and aviation sector. And finally, third, we will hear from Stephen Drax at the Drax Group, which also owns 9 pellet plants in Western Canada through their acquisition of Pinnacle Renewable Energy earlier this year. Drax is leading the way globally in carbon capture technology and highlighting the full potential of North American pellets in the battle against climate change. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Jonathan, Jack, and Stephen for short presentations, and then I will be moderate some questions from the floor and answers to those questions from our panelists. I'll turn it over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, I guess. Today I'm going to talk about modern pellet heating. Let's start from the next slide. Basically, who we are. Groupe Savoie basically is a hardwood manufacturer that has a pellet plant and Compact Appliances. They both joined together to create BSB about 10 years ago. Next slide. BSB basically is a distributor of heating system, and here are some of our suppliers. We have 3 Austrian brand and 1 Italian brand. Okofen, Ers, and Binder are Austrian, and Mabre is basically Italian forced air system. Next slide. Evolution of pellet heating. Basically, pellet heating can replace most fossil fuel application, like we've seen in previous presentation: oil, propane, natural gas, coal, electricity, name it. So it's huge potential. Basically, particle emission was quite something back maybe 10, 15 years ago, especially from wood stove, the bad reputation. But basically, on the pellet side, it was already good. And now it's almost world-class in terms of meeting and exceeding the standards. Wood pellet deliveries are available with specialized truck. So it's no longer you have to carry your fuel to your house or to a business or whatsoever. It can be done automatically. And there's a variety of heating type of appliances. I mean, we all know the pellet stove and fireplaces, but the warm water boilers, steam boilers, forced air, pellet grills, and smokers that are becoming really, really popular are all there to basically get away from fossil fuel. Next slide. Basically, pellet heating is high tech. You can have automatic heating operation with high efficiency combustion. Basically, it's no longer like the old wood stove where you increase the draft or reduce it, or more fuel if it's colder outside or whatsoever. It's all done automatically now. The automatic feeding, you don't have, you can have a system where your hopper is basically feeding your system automatically. The cleaning, basically all you need to do is empty the ash bin. Most of the rest is done automatically now. It requires maybe once or twice a year you do an overall cleanup of your flue and system, but very little cleaning has to be done on a normal day basis. Basically, most appliances are remote monitoring. You can see from your cell phone with an apps and see how your boiler or furnace is doing at your house or business or whatsoever. And like I mentioned, the on-site delivery, same as oil, gas, it's no different now. I'm not saying it's all across Canada. There's not many pellet delivery truck, but the technology is there, so it can be done sooner, I guess. Next slide. Just a typical warm water, like we commonly call hot water system, where you have a hopper for your fuel on the left, your boiler system, and a buffer tank. So this is a typical installation for most hot water installation. Next slide. Steam application. We're proud to basically, we've done the first steam boiler in North America that operates off pellet. It's in Shippagan, New Brunswick, University of Moncton, and the College of New Brunswick there. It's a Binder 850 kilowatt, and it replaced basically an old steam boilers. So just look across Canada, the amount of application that could be like this one there. There's a huge amount of that. Next slide. Condensing pellet boiler. Basically, this is a newer technology. You have the same basically with oil and gas. It's basically taking the energy in your wood pellets, and it can almost recover to 100% of it into your hot water. The application there is where you have water that's not so hot, like not the typical 180 degree water, more like 120, 130 degree. This is the prime basically system. It doesn't require no mixing valve because you're already at the temperature for radiant heating, and you don't need any buffer tank. So just to show that the technology is there and evolving as well on the pellet side. Next slide. Forced air system. Again, a typical installation that was done at GD Irving in St. Leonard inside their pellet mill. It's just a forced air unit, nothing complicated. It runs by itself. It was installed a year ago. Next slide. And at the end there, like I mentioned, same as we've seen before, oil or propane delivery truck. Well, there's some pellet delivery truck as well. The technology is there. And here's an example of the local church here being having some pellet delivered on a regular basis there. And that's thank you very much. That was the quick overview of modern pellet heating.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I'm going to hold questions until the end. So I'm going to now turn it over to introductory comments from Dr. Jack Sadler.
Thanks a lot, Diane. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So next slide, please. But as I'm getting set up on the next slide, so Mahmoud, I look forward to having a barbecue at your place. Congratulations on winning it. So look forward to it. What I'm going to cover in 5 minutes, because Gordon's been very dictatorial in saying get through your slides in 5 minutes. So I'm going to try and do the best I can. What I'm going to present is some of the work we've been doing for the IEA. COP26 is coming up. So we're looking at how bioenergy ties in with solar and wind. So my colleagues at IEA are looking at how you come up with green electricity. And the work I'm going to talk about has been sponsored by Boeing. So long distance transport is the focus of what I'm going to look at. So how do we decarbonize aviation, marine, rail, and trucking? As is covered already in the presentations, biomass is predisposed to heat and compared to transportation, whereas solar, wind, hydroelectric are more towards electricity. So a drop-in biofuel will be increasingly needed by aviation, shipping, long-distance trucking. The main theme of what I want to cover today is biomass-based technologies will be needed to supply this drop-in fuel. And I'm sure there's going to be increasing competition for sustainably sourced. So the sustainability is a big deal, and low carbon intensive biomass. So I'm going to make comparisons with lipids. So if you look at biodiesel and renewable diesel, it's used just now. Most of that's coming from used cooking oil, from canola. And if you monitor the price of lipids, it's pretty well doubled in the last year. Next slide, please. So the point I'm making here is if you look at taking a barrel of oil, you don't just make gasoline, you don't just make diesel, you make all of the products on the right-hand side. So what we've been working very closely with is with some of the oil companies. So I think another group that wants to decarbonize and knows it has to decarbonize, it's the oil sector. So what I'm going to cover very briefly is how you can use biomass to biocrudes as a way of decarbonizing the oil sector. Next slide, please. So I think most of you will be familiar with biodiesel and ethanol. And if you look on the left-hand side, you can see they contain oxygen. So there's still oxygen in biodiesel and in ethanol. So it's not a true drop-in. So a drop-in is basically indistinguishable. You see the top of the slide, the IEA definition that took us a couple of years to come up with. But effectively, a drop-in biofuel is indistinguishable from a fossil-based fuels. And the bottom right, you've got HVO, you've got HPO, some of the examples of a drop-in. Next slide, please. So this is work that was sponsored by Boeing. We've done this over about the last decade. So what Boeing looked at is where's a low carbon jet fuel likely to come from. So Canada's fortunate to not only have lots of biomass, but we're a major supplier of canola. So if you look at vegetable lipids, we make a lot and we export a lot. So this work was funded by Boeing and by the Garden, the Green Aviation Network. And so this work that we looked at was starting an initial supply chain using lipids and then replacing that with biocrudes. Next slide, please. So the initial supply chain will be established with what we call conventional, low carbon intensive, so like used cooking oil, tallow. As I mentioned before, though, one of the challenges with this feedstock is it's expensive, and also there's a limited amount. So if you, again, monitor the price of used cooking oil, tallow, or even canola, it's been going up rapidly because of the very fast expansion in terms of oil companies using this as a feedstock. So in the mid to longer term, we're going to need advanced lower carbon intensive fuels, and that's going to be via biomass derived biocrudes. So it's going to be the longer term choice. It's better able to address sustainability issues, we think. That was covered earlier on because of it's a residue. And hopefully it will be a lower cost than lipids, but that yet is to be defined. Next slide, please. So this is a project we call the ATM project. That's if you look at the title there, the Assessment of Likely Technology Maturation Pathways to Produce Biojet from Forest Residues. You can see why we called it the ATM project. So we really looked at 3 different biocrude suppliers. It was upgraded either by CanMet in Ottawa or by PNNL in the US. And again, this work was funded by Boeing. Next slide, please. And really the take home, and this full report is posted on our website or on the IA website. Biojet fuel could be successfully produced from softwoods. The biojet fraction meets the majority of the STM and really no real showstoppers there. What was attractive to us in Boeing is that you could get emission reductions of about 70% were achieved compared to fossil jet fuel. And the techno-economic comparison made it reasonable. So effectively, the costs were at least comparable with lipid-derived issues. And if anybody's been monitoring what's going on in the US since the Biden administration comes in, this is a very hot area. It's a very high priority for the US. And there's increasing interest from the oil sector. So if you look at Alberta, the number of plants that are going in place, either co-processing or doing standalone facilities. So this is an area that of increasing interest and increasing investment. Next slide, please. So I want to kind of wrap up here on what we're doing in British Columbia. I'm going to talk about our BC Smart Secretariat. So if you look at the website here, you can go and look at it. And BC Smart stands for BC Sustainable Marine Aviation Rail and Truck Drop-in Fuels. And again, the concept here is not just to make one fraction safe for jet, but also to end up making a range of fuels that can be used specifically with the long distance transport sector. Next slide, please. Really, how do we decarbonize long distance transport? Well, you're not going to electrify it. You're not going to use hydrogen. So effectively, you need a drop-in fuel. Why is BC interested in it? Well, we're an important logistic hub. So we have national and international links here. My last slide is going to talk about the Clean BC plan. And also we're lucky to have some forward-thinking oil companies. The local oil company Parkland is actually routinely co-processing just now. So taking a 5% blend of lipids and running it through the refinery with fossil fuels. So that's one way that they can actually get some credit from the low carbon fuel standard. And also their customers can end up with a lower carbon intensive fuel. Next slide, please, which I think is my last slide. So really what's driving this is policy, because fossil fuels, I think, will continue to be cheap. So we actually need these policies because even though fossil fuels are cheap, we all know the cost of climate change. We've had it ably demonstrated here in BC with the forest fires. If you look at the bottom of this slide, we're going to be increasing the supply of renewable fuels by about 650 million litres. And the hope is this will be making use of the pellet supply chain. So rather than exporting pellets, can we use this biomass in BC to make drop-in biofuels? So thanks a lot for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Jack. And our last speaker now, Stephen.
Good evening. All right, I'm going to talk about creating the world's first carbon negative power station in the 2020s. Next slide, please. So first off, a little bit about Drax. Drax power station in North Yorkshire, converted from coal to sustainably sourced biomass. We generate 12% of the UK's renewable electricity, and we hope to develop the power station to lock away CO2 with our BECCS project. Next slide, please. So our ambition and where we've come from. So established in the 1970s, converted our first biomass unit in 2013, and we've actually ended commercial coal generation just earlier this year. We started experimenting with biomass back in 2003. We finally converted the fourth of our 6 units in 2018. And we now generate, as I've said, 12% of renewable electricity. And what next? We now want to go on and go from carbon neutral to carbon negative. In 2019, we piloted carbon capture at our biomass facility in Yorkshire. In 2020, we established a second pilot facility that's informing our feed work for our large project. And hopefully going forward in 2024, we'll begin construction on the CCS aspect of Drax Power Station, which will enable us to capture 4 million tonnes of CO2 per annum per unit. Next slide, please. So what is BECCS? I'm pretty sure everybody on this call knows, but I'll just give a quick overview. And it's about breaking the carbon cycle, sustainable forestry, and the residues that come off it absorb the carbon as the tree grows. We break the cycle from not releasing it, but capturing it and storing it in geological formations. And that's it in its simplest form. Next slide, please. So where are we? Well, Drax has got the UK's most technically advanced CCS project. We've had 2 solvent pilots running at Drax to determine the flue gas compatibility with the solvents in use and working out the degradation rate of those solvents. We've done some testing at Sintef in Norway on various types of biomass to fully understand the effect it has. We've completed pre-FEED work on our project at Drax, focusing on the CCS refit of 2 biomass units initially. We've started the development consent process, which is the planning permitry in the UK. That commenced in Q1 this year. And we're looking to submit the designated consent order in the beginning of next year, which hopefully will give us approval to commence construction in the second half of 2022. We've put in place a license agreement for the capture technology. We are now tendering and due to announce very shortly the successful tenderer as our EPC partner to go through the feed and detailed design to enable our project to become real. And we should start that feed study in the back end of this year. Next slide, please. So what else? What else could we do for the world? Next slide, please. So we're looking at how we roll out this around the world and do BECCS work globally. The objective really is to look at the concept and figure out how to do it better with an integrated concept design on a new build power station, therefore getting the efficiencies integrated for the heat rejected back into the system and making the old system more efficient. We're validating the assumptions we've created through the work we've done so far and looking at the efficiency gains from the complete heat integration, as I said. And then we're looking at new geographies where it may be strategically aligned with our goal to develop. And some of that is dependent on policy. And we're looking around the world for places where policy exists towards biomass, CCS, negative emissions, and infrastructure is there or thereabouts. We're looking for locations where sustainable biomass is at the heart and the forefront of the area. This will encourage sustainable forests and allow us to deliver BECCS around the world. Next slide, please. And that's it in a nutshell. I think I kept to my time, so hopefully in the good books. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. All right, so we're part of the program where we can tap into the minds and knowledge of these thought leaders that you've heard quick presentations on, Jonathan, Jack, and Stephen. So I will be looking at the floor, but I'd like to just start with a couple of questions of my own, if I may, from each member, and then revert to the floor questions. So Jonathan, given that you were our first speaker, I'll start with you. And I'm just wondering, when you look at Canada, Canada has hydro energy for a lot of its supply. So I'm just wondering what the key drivers for commercial and institutional uptake of bioheat and bioenergy domestically in Canada is.
Well, basically, we have region where it's really heavy on oil and gas. And this is where I see the pellet heating taking off. It's basically the low-hanging fruit in a way, where it can be done easily. Pellet appliance costs a lot of money. It's high capital costs, but low total costs when you go year after year with your fuel use and everything. And I see this as one of the where it's going to evolve really more rapidly first.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Jack a question now. This is maybe a personal question to you, Jack, but where does your passion come from? You've been a super advocate for biofuels for a long time and the use of wood biomass in that production. And it looks like there's becoming more and more interest. You're ahead of your time, if you will. So just curious where that passion comes from and what's behind it.
Thanks, Dan. I guess I've always been passionate about alcohol. That must be the reason. No, I think, as you know, Dan, I think where we are in BC, we're lucky enough to have hydroelectricity, green electricity, just like Jonathan knows, if you look at Quebec. So I think we've got this well-established forest sector. And as Jamie covered, we're really good at actually sequestering carbon. Here at UBC, we used to have the tallest wooden building. So I think part of it is working at a university, you do think generationally, you know, what's going to happen. I think climate change is real. I think the debate now is pretty well looked at this as man-made. So, and I think fossil fuels are cheap. So the issue is how do we kind of get off our addiction? So you need the policy. So I think BC's been great in terms of some of the lead. We pay a carbon tax. We have a low carbon fuel standard. We have a sustainably managed forest. So I think it's really thinking generationally. We need the quality of life we have. So how do we basically translate that into a sustainable way of living? So that's why let's see how COP26 works out during COVID. It's going to be interesting.
It will be. Thanks for that, Jack. And as Chief Forester, I have to look both short-term and long-term as well. So I'm always looking for what's the next best thing for the forest sector. So I can relate to that. Great. All right, Stephen. So BECCS is a new buzzword. And it's, you know, some people think they understand what it is and some people don't. So I'm just wondering if you can broaden our knowledge base about what BECCS really is and how does it work and how is it more climate beneficial than traditional use of pellets?
Yeah, sure. So BECCS, or bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, is a new buzzword, and the one we are concentrating in the short term is BECCS to power. So BECCS to generate electricity. And basically, as I said in the presentation, it's about breaking the carbon cycle. So biomass is carbon neutral at the stack. By capturing that CO2 in the flue gas and sequestering it under in geological formations, we can permanently take the CO2 out of the air because we're utilizing sustainable forests. They absorb more CO2. We take that out of the flue gas as we utilize that fiber, and therefore we are actively removing carbon from the atmosphere during the life cycle of that plant. So it can work in various ways. We'll be using a solvent system, but essentially that's it. It's about breaking the carbon life cycle. The tree absorbs, we store, and as a result, the carbon in the atmosphere goes down.
Thanks, Stephen. So there's a question from the floor. It says for Jack or for Diane. I'm not sure a question can be given to the chair, so I'm going to turn it to you, Jack. So the question is, what can be done to increase the actual use of residual fiber utilization licenses by the BC forest products industry? Currently, there's still a lot of post-harvest biomass being left behind in the forest. Sawmill companies have not been transferring access within their tenures to wood pellet operators because they might want to use it later. And that's the question posed to us.
So Diane, I mean, keeping the alcohol, that's a 3-beer discussion, that one, in terms of trying to answer that. So 3 beers each. So, I mean, as the audience knows, it's one of these issues with regard to economic sustainability. So I think we're on the right route in BC in terms of what we're trying to do. I think the Pellet Association has been very catalytic in what to do there. There's all the bits and pieces. So my sense is we're on the right track. There's a lot more we can do. I think, Jamie covered on in terms of forest management. How do we incentivize forest management ahead of time to pull more of that residues out? And you need the different players. I mean, I think the Wood Pellet Association is densifying that material. I had mentioned the fact that you've got things like Boeing really interested in taking forest residues that you can guarantee are sustainable and trying to make jet fuel out of it, realizing it's going to be a lot more expensive. So I think really good question, not easy to answer in this type of, we could have a conference on how to answer that one. And I think, Diane, you and if you look at the ministry in terms of how do you actually deal with this issue is trying to find a solution. So I know I haven't answered the question, but I'm optimistic that we'll do a much better job of bringing out more material from the forest for a whole bunch of reasons. Is that okay instead of being evasive?
That's very good. Thank you. Maybe I'll just add, I am moderator, so I can do this. But, when you look at the intentions paper for modernizing the policy in British Columbia, there's some key signals in there as to using what we used to call waste materials, but bringing it into the bush and trying to get further utilization for every part of the tree that's harvested. And part of that is, in historical times, we used to use beehive burners to burn this stuff up and it just went into the atmosphere. And then that policy change happened and pellet industry was born, if you will, as part of a reason of that. So what the intentions paper is looking at now is phasing out things like slash pile burning. And to do that, that's a clear policy message. But we also need, so policy is only one piece, as you said, we need the commercialization of products of what and where these materials can be used. Pellets plays a key role in that. And we also need the demand side. And again, pellets is showing us that a new commodity is in play. There is a demand for it. And we need society to be willing to look at other opportunities of where they get their products from and what the raw materials being used are. And climate is a big driver for us in that regard. Okay. So back to the floor. It looks like this is for you, Stephen. For the case of Drax Power Plant, how advanced the policy support and carbon pricing has to be to have financially sustainable BECCS? And does the UK have the geology for CCS?
Okay, so yeah, easy one first, the second half of that question. Does the UK have geology? Yes, it does. And it has it relatively close to the power station. For those who know the UK, we're in East Yorkshire and just off the coast there's a saline aquifer which is being assessed as part of the Northern Endurance Partnership, which is Drax is a member of, to explore sequestering carbon in that saline aquifer. So the indications are there is enough room for many years of many Draxes plus the other projects in the area. I think 600 million tons plus. So as a minimum. So geology, yes. Majority of it offshore though. The first part, we continue to have conversations with the UK government around support. These projects are not cheap. The capital requirement is quite intense, but with a sensible carbon price and government backing, then these projects should be easily doable, which is a massive benefit.
Thank you. Our next question, I'm going to ask each of the speakers to give their perspective on, because you all have varying backgrounds for this. So the question is around educating and presenting the facts around sustainability and climate benefits of pellets and forest management. This is of utmost importance. And the association is doing a great job, but often this is an emotional opposition to bioenergy, including pellets, which can get in the way of making the progress that we're trying to do. How do we reach people on an emotional level to get them to feel good about using biomass for energy and or other products, I would suggest, down the chain? I'll start with you, Jonathan.
Well, basically, I would encourage people to listen to Jamie's presentation that he done earlier about not using all the wood that's being left in the forest. We basically have a treasure, in our hands, and we just need to use it. I think all the facts are there to prove the science behind the benefit of it. And it's just a matter of getting the right policies in place to discourage the use of fossil fuel and encourage the use of biomass.
Jack?
Yeah, really good question, and not easy to answer. I mean, the way I look at it is, as you know, Dan, part of it is with the use of alcohol. You know, food versus food, fuel versus food type of stuff. So that's never going to go away. I look at the current discussion about vaccination. I mean, why are people not getting vaccinated? It's totally illogical. And what I find working in a university is that type of question is a great one. So dealing with students who are encouraged to ask those really tough type of questions. How do you justify it? So my sense is it's never going to go away. It's always going to be there, which is good. We should be taken into account in terms of sustainability. But I think it very much ranges into the emotional. So even though you can come up and be very factual, this is our work with the IEA. We're spending a lot of time dealing with this issue, showing it's sustainable. There's a lot of organizations. Pellet Association plays a really good role. But it's a tough one because it goes into emotion rather than logic. So I think we just keep basically giving the facts, bringing independent groups as our university is useful, because I think hopefully we're independent. That being said, I just use vaccination as something that just amazes me in terms of the decisions some people make. So it's always going to be there.
Okay. Stephen.
Yeah, I think I echo Jack's comments earlier. I mean, this is an emotional impulse by lots of people, and I think we've got to keep educating and explaining the process, and making people aware that it's a sustainable source product, and the fact that these questions are quite helpful because it keeps a focus on maintaining that sustainability and keeps us operating credibly. And so the questions and the explanations and the education that we have to continually do is not necessarily a bad thing, but breaking that emotional link between somewhere where you walk your dog and play with your kids to actually a working resource and can be sustainably managed is quite important educational piece to continue doing.
Thank you. This one, I'm just going to leave it open to whatever panel members want to address it. And it is in the area of biomass. How do we get forestry and agriculture working together to maximize benefits? The agriculture sector is far behind in using biomass. Agreed, there is more biomass to take out in forestry side yet as well. And there are lessons to be learned between the two sectors. Which one of the panelists wants to offer a Jack, you mentioned it in your presentation with regards to raw material going into fuels and whatnot. Maybe I'll ask you to start then.
Yeah, well, as I said, it would be great to get Jonathan and Stephen here. I think there's going to be increasing competition for biomass. I just used the example of lipids. I look at how much used cooking oil, canola, it's going up because of the fuel market, big demand. So it's not the traditional products. My sense is that I know comparing the US and Canadian situation, so the US has got lots of agricultural biomass. We tend to be predominantly forestry. And I think there's going to be basically more and more demand for biomass. I think agriculture has some challenges. You know, it's seasonal. You've got the storage, you've got high silica content. There's a range of issues that we don't have in the forest biomass. But I think the kind of pathways, if I look at what's happening with the pellet sector, that's all being pioneered. If I look at the fact that Drax is using the biomass it is, looking at carbon capture and storage, that's great because it gives us time to build up in terms of the issues with agriculture. And I mean, as you know, Diane, I've been heavily involved in cellulosic ethanol. So the US plants were there all based on agricultural residues. So the actual technology was pretty good. The problem was the feedstock handling, the storage. Where they ran into those issues is how do you keep it dry? How do you stop stones getting mixed in with it? So I think what will happen is eventually the economics are going to be such that you will need these agricultural residues. So I think partly policy, but really economics are going to drive it because I think the price of biomass is going to go up.
Thanks, Jack. Does Stephen or Jonathan, do you want to add to that?
Well, if I can add, forestry has to work with the ag side, but the equipment manufacturer as well. And I'm going to give you an example of in Austria, Binder, they've designed a boiler to basically burn chicken litter. And it's working well. And that's basically a biomass from that industry. And I think each have their own basically challenges on the type of product, but the equipment manufacturer has to adapt to make sure it can deal with that product itself. So,
thank you. Stephen,
Yeah,
anything to add?
I got to agree. I think economics will drive demand. We at Drax have utilised a variety of different biomasses, from agricultural feedstocks all the way through to woody biomass. They do present their own challenges chemically to utilise, as well as the handling and storage and processing. But I think as the demand for biomass grows, we will be, forced to go look for more value feedstocks, and that will drive innovation in those areas, and we'll figure a way to store it, to handle it, to process it, and to utilize it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's the time for our panel that we've got. There's a few more questions there, so maybe we can have some of our panelists offer to answer them if they are so inclined. I'd like to thank all our panelists. I thought it was a fantastic session, real opportunities and very forward thinking. But once again, hands off to you, and thank you for your presentations.